On today's show, Joel Embiid agrees to a 3-year, $193 million contract extension with the Philadelphia 76ers. What that contract means for Embiid and the 76ers, plus who has to do the most adjusting between Embiid, Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey for the big three to work. It's all coming up on today's Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you actually place your bets. You're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet. Just head on over to FanDuel.com. You can take a look at so many different wagers, like the different weekly specials that they have, who's going to make the playoffs, win totals. My favorite, just go take a look at who's going to win the Super Bowl. Right now, the Kansas City Chiefs favorites to win at plus 500. Right behind them, you have the San Francisco 49ers at plus 650. And then in third place, the Buffalo Bills at plus 950 to win the Super Bowl this season. So all those odds and so much more, all available to you right at your fingertips. Just head on over. That's FanDuel.com. Joining us now is the host of Locked On 76ers, Keith Pompey, who you can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Sixers here as Joel Embiid agrees to a 3-year, $193 million contract extension with a player option in that final year, the 2028-2029 season. Now you've got Embiid, you've got Paul George, you've got Tyrese Maxey, all locked up long-term. Keith, how important is this extension for Embiid, for the 76ers, especially after some of the commentary maybe earlier this offseason from Joel Embiid, some of the speculation about his long-term future in Philadelphia?
I mean, I think it's huge. I mean, because you think about it, as you talked about, not only this summer, it was like last summer, the year before that, it was always, well, if the Sixers don't get it right, they're going to lose Joel Embiid. They're going to lose him. And I think that, giving them this money on top of getting Paul George, Joel is extremely happy right now. Like, he knows that, he's probably going to retire a 76er. He also knows that they, after summers of not doing things that they were supposed to, that they finally went out there and got an A-list type of player for him to play with.
It definitely seems like a step in the right direction for the 76ers. Obviously, this, drastic kind of arms race in the Eastern Conference, everybody gearing up to try and be the team to maybe knock the Boston Celtics off of their defending champion throne. Now, obviously, so now you've got the big three. They're all locked in long term. Of the big three, though, Keith, when you start looking at, how and envisioning how Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey and Paul George all will start playing together and working together on the court, who has to do the most adjusting for this to work the way the 76ers want it to work?
It's weird. That's a great question. That's a great question. I think if we say the most, it's probably going to have to be Paul George because, now, like, he's always played with other elite players, right? But there was times that he was the man because of injuries or because of this and that. Now I think he's going to have to adjust the most because he's coming into a situation where a scoring point guard, he's coming into a situation with a guy who was, won 2 consecutive scoring titles, who was the MVP. So with that being said, I think he has to adjust the most, but I also believe all of them have to adjust. I think that Joel Embiid has to realize that less is going to have to be a little bit more for them to be successful and for him to be healthy. I also realize that, Tyrese Maxey knows that he's going to have to get Paul George involved a lot, for them to be successful. But if the one person I've had to pinpoint who's going to have to adjust his game the most, I'm going to have to say George on the offensive end. I think defensively, he doesn't have to make any changes at all.
We've seen, when teams start to load up on the star talent, when they've got 2 and sometimes 3 stars, we often see teams kind of stagger their star players, right? Who do you think is most likely to, I guess, kind of anchor the bench units for Philly this upcoming season?
I would say when it comes down to anchoring the bench units with the staggering, I would say PG, because if you look at Maxey, there was times when they had Maxey out there trying to anchor the bench units and they struggled, right? But I think when you have a PG there, he's a guy who can handle the ball, he can come up, he can do a lot of multiple things. So if I'm Nick Nurse, I feel more comfortable with him and running the offense through him with the bench unit. So I would say it would be him.
On that note, though, obviously PG just turned 34 years old. There was obviously, a little bit of concern from the Clippers on their behalf about wanting to give him this, this huge contract, based on his, previous injury history and some of that. So, do the 76ers maybe have to take it slow or go easy on Paul George, right? Because you envision, right, in the starting lineup, he's going to be tasked with guarding the opposing team's best perimeter player more than likely. If he's also going to be in charge of kind of running those bench units, like, is it one of those things where the Sixers maybe have to look at themselves in the mirror and be like, okay, we can't overburden PG, because if he gets hurt because he's just, there's too much on his plate, then that's going to kind of screw everything up.
Yeah, and I also think that's where they have the luxury of having like Kyle Lowry too. Like, I believe although Paul is going to be there, you're going to have Kyle in there as well, doing certain things. You also have a Reggie Jackson. So it's not going to be kind of sort of like how it was like, okay, Tobias, we need you to run everything. We need to run everything through you. I think that they're just going to have a lot of different staggered mix and match. And Paul's going to get a lot of his scoring there, but I don't think that it's going to be like how Tobias was. That's where he got all of it. You know what I mean? But yeah, you are right. I think, but I do believe that you are going to have to be careful with them, because let's face it. I mean, the Sixers have already won an Eastern Conference championship in the last couple of years ago. They've averaged over 50 wins over the last couple of years ago. The problem is they can't get beyond the second round. So yes, Paul George, he could do whatever he wants, make first team All NBA, he could do whatever, but people are going to look at that money as a waste if they don't get out the second round. So if you are Nick Nurse, you're building for the playoffs and you want them to be able to go at least to the Eastern Conference Finals. So yeah, I can see that a lot. I can see what you're talking about.
You mentioned his name a moment ago, Kyle Lowry, and I'm curious, what is his role on this team this upcoming season? Is he coming in? Is he still going to be starting for this team? Is he going to shift to a bench role? How do you envision Nick Nurse deploying him this next campaign?
That's the $1 million question. But I don't really see him starting for this team right now, because we talked about PG, a guy who can be a secondary ball handler, right? I feel like it's kind of like similar to what they envisioned it being when he first was traded, right? When he first came here, he was envisioned to be the backup point guard, also a leader in the locker room, someone who can work with Maxey, help get him to the next level. I still look at it that way now. Now, due to injuries and due to players not playing, he was inserted into the starting lineup. But right now, I feel like of all the players, he has the longest relationship and perhaps the closest relationship with Nick Nurse. He's a gritty guy. He's also a winner, right? A guy from Philly. So I look at him at his age now to be that veteran on the bench. Now, don't get me wrong. I think he'll play, but he's going to be that guy on the bench who's going to kind of sort of be the extension of the coaching staff. You know what I mean? Because when we look at the point guard position, they also have Reggie Jackson too. So, you know what I mean? It's like I look at Kyle more for providing leadership above everything else.
If not Kyle Lowry in the starting lineup, it's going to be the big three. Kelly Oubre had a statement season last year. I think he's probably a lock for the Sixers starting lineup. Who's that fifth starter then?
You know what? Right now, at this particular time, I'm leaning towards Caleb Martin. right? And, some people might say, well, where's your power forward? I think that, in today's basketball,
Well,
we see
where was your power forward with Tobias Harris, right? Like,
yeah. So some people are going to say that, right? But I look at it as, Kelly, Caleb, and PG are like three interchangeable wings. That's how the Sixers look at them as well. So I think that, that's going to be the lineup that they'll go out there and they'll start the games with. But as you alluded to, you're going to start staggering players. You're going to have people doing different things. But for right now, I look at that more so as the best starting lineup. And part of the reason why is because, you want to have some perimeter defenders on the floor as well. Like you got PG, what I mean? We know what Caleb Martin can do. Kelly Oubre showed last year that he can be a better defender than people gave him credit for, right? And he also has that length. He's 6'7", Caleb 6'5", PG 6'8". So I think when you incorporate those guys with Joel Embiid, it's kind of like that's going to be a pretty good mix.
Will Joel Embiid be able to live up to the expectations that come with his 3-year, almost $200 million contract extension? How will the big three mesh and coalesce this upcoming season? You're going to have us covered with all of that and so much more over at Locked On 76ers. Keith, thanks for stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thanks for having me.